and put two and two together. Oh, you're going to get married to your wife. Oh. And started this chain of events of, well, we're a private Catholic school. We don't recognize same-sex relationships, same-sex marriage. So they terminated Miss Brown on that basis. Miss Brown went to the press, and she said, I was terminated because of my sexual orientation. And some of you may remember this. It blew up on national media, social media. It was all over the place. Protests started happening in front of St. Mary's Academy. It's located in downtown Portland. It shut down traffic in downtown Portland. And so the board of St. Mary's Academy called an emergency meeting, and in good committee fashion, they put out a statement. And the statement read, we're a privately run Catholic high school. We adhere to the doctrines and principles of the Catholic Church. Therefore, while we acknowledge Miss Brown's relationship, it is not congruent with our beliefs and hiring practices. So therefore, that is why we terminated Miss Brown. And they released the statement. End of problem? No. It blew up even more. The day after the statement came out, Tim and Mary Boyle released a statement saying that they were going to withhold their annual $1 million contribution to St. Mary's Academy. You may not know the name Tim and Mary Boyle here, but in Portland it's a big name because Tim Boyle is the chairman and CEO of Columbia Sportswear. And his wife Mary is an alumna of St. Mary's Academy. So, the board reconvened again and decided to reverse their decision. And they reversed their decision and basically gave Miss Brown her job back. I don't know, actually I doubt that she's there. The reason why I'm telling you the story is because it blew up so bad that our Adventist Academy and school principals were now getting phone calls from reporters on what our hiring practices are in the Adventist church. And then we had a media crisis to deal with. Dan Nicola, who was the principal at Portland Adventist Academy at the time, got this phone call. He didn't get it himself. It was a message that was relayed to him, and didn't call back right away. But instead, what is the message that we need to be sending out? As communications people will tell you, Raymond, that you do not need to answer every phone call from the press. You don't. And that was what we advised Mr. Nicola. This was, they were just casting nets, and this was not specific to Portland Adventist Academy or a particular school of ours. He was just casting nets on what the hiring practices were of private church schools. The reporter never called back, and so the issue died down. But then the question remained, is there a particular response that we need to have prepared when this happens again? And it caused, so now I'm getting calls from school principals. Well, what is our policy? Well, so I pose the question to you: Can a private church school discriminate in the hiring practice on the basis of sexual orientation? Did I hear yes? Yes. Yes, and the answer is yes. Legally, a private institution can discriminate in its employment practices on the basis of sexual orientation, and it's based on a legal doctrine called the ministerial exception. The ministerial exception is codified both in statutory law, case law, and in administrative regulations. What the ministerial exception doctrine says is a private religious organization should be allowed to make whatever decisions, employment decisions, they need to make in accordance with their doctrines, beliefs, and policies. Then the question came, well, what about schools enrolling students? You know, if you have a student that is is of same-sex orientation, well, can a school discriminate? That's a question that I think was addressed with the NAD. The North American Division issued a statement on human sexuality 2 years ago. And what that statement did was make a distinction between orientation and practice. It was in the context, now the statement was issued in the context of church membership, but what that statement did was that if sexual orientation will not disqualify you from being part of a membership in the Seventh-day Adventist Church in good standing. It will not. But, and I didn't print it out, but I want to read the right words for you here. The bane of getting older with your eyes here. Okay, so this is on the, so you can actually go to the North American Division website and print these documents out. This is on page 2. We differentiate between sexual orientation, which denotes an enduring pattern of romantic or sexual attraction to one or both genders, and sexual behavior or activity. Given the complexities of the fallen human condition, cites Romans 3:23, we recognize that individuals may experience same-sex orientation through no choice of their own. The struggles that they face call for the active support and loving compassion of fellow Christians, and the Adventist Church can help them find their identity in Christ. While the Bible does not address sexual orientation, it does describe appropriate and inappropriate sexual behavior. We acknowledge that attraction to someone of the same gender may be temptation, but not the act of sin. Therefore, those with same-sex orientation who conform to biblical teachings about sexual behavior may fully participate in the life of the Adventist Church. That really is the latest iteration of that topic from the North American Division. A year later, the North American Division issued a statement on transgenderism. And let me read you a passage from that. And this is, let's see, wrong one. And this is known as paragraph 6, if you download it on the document. Because the Bible regards humans as holistic entities and does not differentiate between biological sex and gender identity, the church strongly cautions transgender people against reassignment. Okay, wait a minute, let me see. That's not the right one. The church, okay. The church as the community of Jesus Christ is meant to be a refuge and a place of hope, care, and understanding for all who are perplexed, suffering, struggling, and lonely, for a bruised reed he will not break. All people are invited to attend the Seventh-day Adventist Church and enjoy the fellowship of its believers. Those who are members can fully participate in church life as long as they embrace the message, mission, and values of the church. And then let me finish with this. Those who experience incongruity with their biological sex and gender identity are encouraged to follow biblical principles in dealing with their distress. They are invited to reflect on God's original plan of purity and sexual infidelity. Belonging to God, all are called to honor him with their bodies and their lifestyle choices. So again, in this statement, it is making this distinction of identity, but also adhering to the biblical principles of the church. I was also going to mention the in our union we are experiencing wild differences in the accommodation of bathroom accommodation. Let's put it that way. There are some states, I know some states in the United States now, that says that you must accommodate someone to use whatever restroom they identify with. In our union, in the state of Washington, there is no religious exception for that. So if somebody identifies, if a biological male identifies as a female, then the law requires the institution to let them use a women's restroom. And vice versa. If they are biologically female but identify as a male, then the law requires that they be accommodated and they use a men's restroom. So suddenly I'm getting calls mainly from schools. Well, what do we do? And my response is, well, you've got to accommodate. You've got to accommodate, because now the issue is, these principles, it's more problematic because they are in rural schools where it's not, there aren't multiple bathrooms. There's a girl's bathroom and a boy's bathroom. So I have to advise them, if they need to use the boys' bathroom, then what you do is they're the only one that's in the bathroom at that time, and you have someone standing guard outside while they're using the facilities. Then that way you're in compliance with the accommodation law of letting them use the restroom. And so these are the kind of topics that are coming up. It's funny, I go to Walla Walla University and I talk to their education students about legal issues that are coming up in the classroom. And I tell them these things, and I said, you know what? This is not something that's 5 years, 10 years down the road. This is going to happen when you graduate. These are issues that are happening now, so when you go and get your first teaching assignment, this will be something that you're going to be facing. The other thing that we're facing in the church are issues of um, supervision. No longer are we in the days of, you know, Becky, can you go with Japhet and go down the hallway and get the projector in the AV closet? Those days are gone. We are now in an era of basically full supervision of every student at all times. Again, my job is to mitigate risk. It is because there is so much liability involved when students are left unsupervised. And not only in schools, but even on the playground, you may have issues where two students go behind a play structure and something happens. And so there are issues of supervision that have to happen, and I'm not only just in the school, but it has to happen in a church, obviously, too, where there is always direct supervision to make sure that, number one, there is no injury that happens to the child, but also there is no inappropriate behavior that can happen to the child while they're on the premises of the church or the school. Not only inappropriate behavior, I'm not talking about abuse from adult to child, but now also abuse from child to child. That's also happening as well. And so those are the things that are starting to mushroom in, and it's actually a phenomenon that's happening across the country. And so these are things that we're looking at. All right, so that was a long introduction to kind of what I do. Though let's talk about the church. I had the privilege of serving on the North American Division Church Governance Committee for, it met for, I don't know, we had a series of meetings for over a year. And it started with a meeting of all church administrators. They met in Dulles, in Virginia, and the task was to form 3 committees, one on church structure, one on education, and one on mission. And the goal was to not only define these areas for the church, but also find efficiencies in these areas of governance, education, and mission. My committee was to look at how can we be efficient in the way we do business of the church. Because as you know, maybe you don't know, but we have a multi-level, multi-tiered church. We have the General Conference at the top, the North American Division here for our continent. Then we have union conferences below the divisions. Then we have local conferences below that, and then the local church. And by the way, I was very adamant when I was on the committee. I was very adamant to make sure that the local church was considered a level of our denominational structure, because they always kind of tended to stop at the conference. But this is where mission happens. It's right here. Yeah, this is where people are touched by God and touched by Jesus. So the local church I was very adamant about including that. We looked at basically 3 areas of efficiency. One was structure. Is there a way we can be more efficient in the administration of the church? We evaluated the levels of the church. For example, a lot of services and responsibilities at the local conference level, is it being done is the same thing being done at the union conference level? And if it is, for that matter, is it also being done at the division level? And we charted out a matrix and everything, and we saw that in some cases there was duplication in all levels of the church, even the local church. So for example, we may have had a local church. You may have a local church that has a men's ministries director. Okay, then we also have then if they're in a conference that also has a men's ministries director, and a union has a men's ministries director, and a men's ministries director at division level, well, you've got 4 positions that essentially provide the same service. These are the things that we're looking at. The second thing that we're looking at is the issue of finance. The church is a very interesting financial animal because the offering that you give for local church budget stays at the local church. The tithe that you pay has this system of what's called reversion. It goes up and it reverts back down and touches the different levels of the church. It does eventually reach back to the local church, but it is designed to enable and fund the ministry of the church. And so that's why we have this system of reversion. And I learned so much because it's based on formulas and algorithms and stuff. But anyway, so we looked at, are there ways that we can redesign this reversion formula that drives money back to the local church? And so the recommendation that we presented was a recommendation that drove resources basically back to the local conference, and then from there make sure that it goes to the local church for ministry. And then the third area was an area that we don't deal with much on the West Coast, but on the East Coast, and that was the issue of regional conferences. Is there something that can be done in the issue of regional conferences? And it's interesting that having come from the East Coast, we had a lady on the East having grown up on the West Coast. We had a lady from the West Coast who, on our committee, didn't know what a regional conference was. And so we kind of had to bring people up to speed as to, okay, well, what are regional conferences? What's the purpose of a regional conference? And since it's under our purview, is there anything that we can do? And so in the end, there wasn't really a recommendation to do anything because really the time wasn't right. This is not the time or the period of time to address any kind of revision of regional conferences. So with the church governance recommendation, we had kind of three buckets of recommendation. We had one bucket of radical changes. This is going to take some pain and some change and some willpower. And then we had a moderate bucket of, okay, this is going to be hard, but not, it's not really going to make much of a dent. And then we had things that can be done now. These were kind of feel-good measures. They really wouldn't have an immediate impact at this moment, but we can do something about it now, and maybe make a small dent in some way. That report was presented to the NAD year-end meeting in 2016, and still waiting to hear word. So, and I'm sure, my understanding. So what happened was after it was presented to the North American Division year-end meeting, Elder Dan Jackson then called for a vote to approve receiving the report, but then also appointed a committee to review the report, I guess, to evaluate the recommendations that we had presented. So the church, at least in North America, is looking at structural efficiencies at some level. I know there are maybe some that are cynical and saying, change will never happen, but at least the acknowledgement is there that change does need to happen, that there is a better way more efficient way to do business for the church. So this last October was year-end meeting for General Conference, Annual Council for General Conference, and very interesting proceedings. So to bring you up to speed, there has been there's been an issue about maintaining conformity and unity amongst unions in North America on policy, and so some documents have been circulating about what does unity look like in the church. And so last October at the annual council, this 14-page document was distributed to the delegates at the meeting to read, digest, discuss, and vote on in a matter of 3.5 hours. Okay, so pause. Okay, even judges, when an attorney is given a brief or a motion that they have just been given, even a judge would give an attorney a set-over of a week to read, digest, and to formulate a response to a legal document. This was done in one afternoon. This was a document that really spurred from unions taking action on women's ordination. Particularly the Pacific Union and Columbia Union. If you watch the proceedings, all 9 union presidents spoke in opposition to the document. Not necessarily directly addressing the topic of ordination, but addressing the topic of process. That this simply was, you can't just ask us to read this, digest this, and have a good faith discussion on this and take a vote in just a matter of a couple hours. At the end of the proceedings, what happened was what I predicted would happen. And that was, and I believe it was Randy Roberts from Loma Linda that presented the motion. The motion was presented to table this document and refer it back to the Unity Committee for review and revision. And that motion passed. And so that is the status of this document, is that it is not dead, but it is not active. This is not an approved document. The reason why I predicted that it would be tabled is because I don't think that there was enough willpower amongst the annual council delegation to actually take a yes or no vote on it. And I think this was a convenient way to move on, get it off the discussion table, and have another committee look at it and revise it. Okay, so this is personal opinion. Now, I'll just give you my personal opinion on this. I think that it is probably better that this document got referred back instead of voted down. Now, I know you're thinking, well, if it got voted down, then it's dead in the water. I think it's better that it got referred back to committee because it still keeps this issue going in some form. If this got voted down, I think that would have empowered the administration of the General Conference to then look at other options. Some may have known it as nuclear options. This keeps nuclear options from happening. That's why my personal opinion is that having this just chilling on the Unity Committee's table is probably the healthiest option for the health of the church. I have made no secret about my personal position on the ordination of women, but I've also made no secret that I don't believe that the church has a policy prohibiting the ordination of women. In fact, the book, chapter, and verse that I cite from the General Conference working policy is B05 subsection 6. Good lawyer talk there. B05 subsection 6, which basically says decisions of ordination are entrusted to the unions. Period. Yes. Let's remember the punctuation. Period. And I've always asked. I said, okay, well, look in the big black book, the General Conference working policy, and you will not find any provision that makes gender a condition of ordination or gender a restriction on ordination. I mean, there is no condition or restriction of gender on the issue of ordination in the working policy. Now, I know that there is in the policy of ordination, it is referenced in the masculine. Okay, but if we're going to play that game, I mean, there are other sections of the policy that are referenced in the masculine as well, but they apply generally. There are also there is also language in the working policy that says that ordination may be restricted. Be restricted on the basis of gender. And a lot of people look at that as, okay, well, there it is, that's the policy. Well, the term may is not restrictive language, it's permissive language. May doesn't require us to do something, may is permissive. And words mean things. And so if it said shall or must, then all right then. I mean, okay, then I will say, okay, then there it is. You shall discriminate. Okay. But it says may. And so that's been my position, in fact, okay, so quick story. I didn't plan to tell this, but I need to tell you. In 1993, I took a Christian ethics class from the great Gerald Winslow at PUC, and Carmen Siebold taught the class. And I wrote my paper on the ordination of women in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And I cited all kinds of ethical arguments and biblical citations. And then I also went to the policy where I said, well, yeah, and our church policy is that the issue of ordination rests with the unions. My paper came back, and they said, you need to share this with the Pacific Union president, and we need to send this up to people to read it. Somehow my paper got into the hands of Bob Falkenberg, who was the General Conference president at the time. Months go by, all I wanted was the A. I mean, really, I just didn't care. I mean, this wasn't, I wasn't looking to, change the world at that point. I just wanted an A. Months go by, and my phone rings in my dorm room at PUC, and in sophomoric college boy fashion, I answer the phone, Joe's Bar and Grill. The voice on the other end says, "Oh, I'm calling for Andre. This is Bob Falkenberg." The one time I answer the phone like that, the General Conference president is calling me. It turns out he was on campus, and he actually had read my paper and wanted to meet with me to discuss it. We had Sabbath lunch. A group of students were invited to Sabbath lunch at President Malcolm Maxwell's home that Sabbath. And Elder Falkenberg invited me to stay by so we could just have a private conversation about this paper. And he didn't really discuss his position on it, but really asked me, he's like, well, how did you become interested in this area? And he said, this is very interesting, well-researched, timely stuff. And he had my paper, had a copy of my paper in front of him, and he closed the manila folder that was in, and he said, and this was in 1993, he said, but this may take 20 years to play out. That was in 1993. And here we are, 25 years later? So, the other thing that comes up also is that, actually, the policy is not in the working policy. It's not in the black book. The policy actually was established in the vote at General Conference in 1990 in Indianapolis, and in 1995 in Utrecht, and in 2015 in San Antonio. You had votes by the General Conference session that the policy is we do not ordain women, and the answer is no, because those votes at the sessions were actually negative votes. Okay, so the question before the session was, in the last General Conference session in San Antonio, the question was, shall the divisions be empowered with the authority to make their own decisions on policy? It was phrased generally policy, but the underlying question was on ordination, right? And the vote, if you remember, the vote was voted down. I'm trying to remember 1,066, but the no vote was 977. I remember the hashtag on that. But that was a no vote. That you do not establish policy by voting no. And the same with the vote in Utrecht in 1995 and in Indianapolis in 1990. Those were no votes. So you can't say that establishes policy, because all that did was it just defeated a motion that was before the body. And so that's another thing that I also mentioned. I know that there's some that have will parse words and policies, and that's fine. But just from my perspective, there's nothing in the working policy that makes gender a requirement or condition of ordination. And the votes of our General Conference sessions in those 3 sessions did not establish any policy, because those were all negative votes, and you don't establish policy by implication. I thought there was. I thought there might be a hand or something. So the North Pacific Union right now, there is nothing active within our union as far as moving forward on the ordination question. Not that it isn't on our minds, but I think what we have a new president, Elder John Friedman, who was actually elected a year ago. He was formerly president of the Washington Conference, and actually one of his final policy actions was in the Washington Conference. They took an enabling action to equalize the status of ordained and commissioned pastors in the Washington Conference. And so Elder Friedman was the architect of that. And so he's now our union president. But I think what we're doing now, as far as the union goes, is just a wait and see position on what happens at the world church level, because things are still volatile, and I know that there are other unions that I think I'm not in on the inner circle of his conversations with other union presidents, but my inkling is that there's a joint understanding with other unions of just let's just see how this plays out. And so we did have a subcommittee of our executive committee on women in leadership that was formed just before General Conference session, actually a couple years before General Conference session, to evaluate and to discuss the issue of ordination, and that committee produced some papers, and we presented a report to the executive committee. but it didn't take a formal action on it. So that also kind of sits in life in some form in our union as well. So in the Pacific Northwest, it's there. It's on the radar screen. So I am open for questions.
Well, Andre, I was really hoping you were going to raise a couple of issues, and so I'm disappointed. I'm really disappointed that I was really hoping you would open at least one can, but it appears that you decided to open everyone, and so this is good. This is great, and I appreciate the honesty and the candor as well, because that's actually really important to have good conversation about this. But due to our time, and I know some of you have appointments, at 3:30 we said we would end. This is what we're going to do. Those of you who need to leave, you can leave right now. We're going to give an extra 15 minutes for Q&A. If you need to disappear, you want to just get up real quickly and just step out, that's great. Those of you who can stay, please stay, and let us open up some questions. And we'll do 15 minutes of questions, and then we'll end at 3:45 in 15 minutes. And so when you come to the microphone, come as close as you can to the microphone. That'd be fantastic. And that'd be super. Thank you.
Please.
All the way back to your discussion in regards to private institutions having greater latitude in regards to the things that they do, two questions that are kind of related. How about students that have government loans within institutions, or institutions that accept government loans? How will that affect them in regards to the government stepping in to have some control over what they're saying?
Yes. So student loans, that's not an issue. The more direct issue is how do our private institutions receive basically direct disbursements from the government. And it used to be that the disbursement had to be a direct allocation, if you will. Now it's becoming more tricky. That I am now saying that if it really comes in any form, that we need to evaluate that, because if there is any form of government assistance, financial, well, it's mainly financial, but that could open the door for government intervention. So yes, so that is a topic. So my answer is before we could identify it pretty early and say, okay, you cannot accept that money, or yes, you can accept that money. Now it's just, if it has any kind of smell of money coming from the government, we're very careful about that. So.
Yes, and you can lower the microphone and just come as close as you can to it. It just helps us.
I had three issues. I think the first two you can handle very quickly. One of them was, is there any conflict between the North American policy, working policy, and the GC working policy?
None that are glaring. I was told by a GCAS, a General Conference auditor, though, that there are, and he cited a whole bunch of inconsistencies between GC and NAD policies that mainly have to do with things like remuneration and things that don't really have any consequence of big policy importance. So yeah, so they do exist, but as far as like big glaring ones, I couldn't be able to identify any.
Okay, the second one was, I'm old enough to remember the Mary Kay case of discrimination. Yes. This involved equal pay for men and women, I believe. Right. That, of course, was with Pacific Press. But so we lost, the church lost in that case, as I remember. that it was decided that the Pacific Press was discriminating, and that was unlawful. Am I right in that, I think?
Yes, yeah, yeah. And when I said the church can discriminate, there is still unlawful discrimination that the church cannot do. Like, the church cannot discriminate on the basis of a race. Race is the big one. And so yeah, so there is still areas that of the Civil Rights Act that the church is not exempt from.
Okay, and the third, maybe a little more complicated. I'm also old enough to remember when the issue of divorce was a much more predominant issue than it is now, divorce and remarriage. I've been on many of elders' boards and church boards in the past. It's my opinion that now that compassion and tolerance have overruled what seem to be the plain words of Scripture, Jesus' words about divorce and remarriage. I would like to suggest that the issue of same-sex marriage perhaps should fall in that same category. That is, what seems to be very plain in the Scriptures can be overruled by the idea of compassion and that sort of intolerance. And I don't make whether you have any comments on that or not.
Yeah. I thank you for the comment. The question on what happens in the church, and when it applies to sexual orientation, I say, if we're going to enforce standards, then it needs to apply to everybody. And so, because if the standards apply to everybody, then the church is in a more defensible legal position to defend itself. So if a teacher is going to be terminated on the basis of sexual orientation, then you know what? We've got to apply the same standard to the Pathfinder leader that's living with his girlfriend. We've got to apply the same standard to, all the way down the line. Because if we're cherry picking standards that we're enforcing and not, that puts the organization at risk. And so I know this kind of addresses their question, but for me, it's if we're going to be enforcing standards, it has to be done uniformly, because then that way the church is in a better position legally. So so that kind of ties in with that comment. I don't really have any comment about the. I mean your comments are duly they're duly noted and is one that is being expressed in churches even in the Northwest. So
thank you. That's idea. Yeah.
Hey, thanks so much for coming and talking to us.
Oh, you bet.
I guess two quick questions. One question is that we have a fairly large lumbering organizational structure, and there seems to be pockets of individuals that have an interest and looking at ways to deal with that. But as I look at it, it seems like there's so much self-interest built into the system to preserve careers and jobs within this giant bureaucracy, that how can the organization ever reform itself short of financial crisis forcing it upon the organization? Do you see that there may be another path to change short of financial crisis? And the other question is on the women's ordination. You may have noticed, there were several young people that were here, and it may have just been a timing thing, but they left during that part of the conversation. my daughter's a student at Walla Walla. Yeah, how long are we as a church going to continue to waste our time and resources over something that, you know, the younger generation, younger people don't even understand why it's even still being discussed?
Right. So to your first question, is there a catalyst that can bring change other than a financial crisis? I think it's willpower. I think we need the political will and courage to do it, because you're right. There's a lot of I'm all for change just as long as I don't have to. Yeah, I'm all for change, just don't touch my stuff. So there is that. To your second question, when I was a junior at Pacific Union College in 1993, and the president of the General Conference said, "This may take 20 years to play out," I thought, you know what? We'll get there before then. We'll get there before then. Here we are, 25 years later. So, and really, I think that as, and this is why I really implore our young people to get involved in the church, because as we look at our church leaders, I'm talking pastors, administrators, as they age out, we need a bench that needs to fill in as they age out. And they're the ones that are going to be our leaders in the future. And so when I see dwindling numbers in our young adult youth membership, that torments me, because who's going to step into the breach when the time comes? And I've always said, your government is run by those that show up. Well, your church is run by those that show up. And I've always pledged that I love my church, and I'm going to show up. And and I started by serving on I started by serving on a Sabbath school committee, and then eventually on finance committee at church and church board, and you know what, I really think I'm really blessed to have the position I have now, because I think it allows me to show up at some level. So I'm hoping that resolution will come to that question soon. I do. So,
Thank you.
yeah.
I too love this church, and I've been a member of this one for 35 years. But I have to tell you, I'm starting to lose trust and confidence in the administration of this church. And I think that's reflected in our local conference by our tithes down. I may be wrong, but does the leadership of our church, World Church, Union, divisions, do they understand that there are many of us, not young, that are losing confidence in their leadership to waste, I'll use the word waste, so much money and resources on this topic, which our young people don't even think is a topic. When in my Sabbath school class today, the request came, could you please tell the church board we need ADA bathrooms here for those in wheelchairs? It's absolutely disgusting that we have wasted so much money on a conference level, a union level, division level, and general conference level. And having read William Johnson's book, and then recently George Knight's books, I love the fact that those men are speaking to the extreme waste of resources, and that the general conference better wake up. And as I asked William Johnson in my house, do you think this church will split? And he said, it might. And if it does, it's okay, because this church will go through. But some of us are getting very tired of this and frustrated with the lack of response. I saw that vote at the annual council is kicking it down the road again and spending more money again. It just doesn't make sense to me that we're going to keep doing this over and over and over. So is there an acknowledgement at the general conference level, division, union, that some of us are about had it?
At least in the Pacific Northwest, there's a sense of that frustration, yes. But, and yeah, you will get frustrated with this answer. It's a wait and see. Because I think that there's an acknowledgement that things move slowly in the church. But I can at least tell you, at least in our territory, your sentiment is there. So,
Andre, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to give one last question, and then I'm going to ask you to give us one guiding principle that you'd like to leave us with to encourage church. Sorry, because we're actually past the time, and I recognized this one here.
Look this way.
Sorry, man. So, but Ray, you can ask afterwards. That's all good. So let's have one last question.
Just an observation. Growing up in the Adventist church, it seems to me that the top leadership is always run by older people. And so if we want, maybe I'm wrong at that, but that's been my observation. So if we want the younger people to get involved, maybe it's time to switch to younger people at the top, because that's what the younger people are looking for. I mean, in my way of thinking. Is that right or wrong?
no, I have always been an advocate for having younger people in leadership. We probably won't have a 35-year-old union president, but a 45-year-old union president would certainly be a good start. Yeah. And but I agree, and so that's why I mentioned is, as I see the next generation coming up, when I hear that they're frustrated with the church, I hear that, but I plead with them, don't leave the church, because you're going to be pastors, you're going to be administrators someday. And that's the hope that I have, is as they come up, they will take these positions.
That's true, but whenever the younger people, the younger generation are always behind. Right. So when we have changes at the top, it's always the older people. Then the next generation of younger people are behind again, and they're always behind, and they're always behind.
Okay,
and
so it's kind of
so they're always behind a generation.
Yeah.
Some of us are still very, very young. But I think they should just hire attractive people, and everything will be fine.
Right.
We're out of time, and we're overextended. And I just wanted you to share with us one word of counsel, a principle that you would encourage us as a community online, globally, when we are to address change in the church. What would be that one word or principle?
The one word, and I mentioned it before, your church is run by those that show up. And the reason why I got involved as a layperson and now as a denominational employee is because I want this church, I love this church, and I want this church to be the best it can be for everybody. For everybody. And so don't give up. Is what I'll leave you with. I know there are issues and all of us don't agree on everything, but our common focus is Jesus, and that's the one thing that we should focus on. That is why we were here. We talked about Acts this morning. We're direct products of what happened in that book, and so I'll just leave you with that. I'll leave with everyone that's watching online. Whatever your issue is, stay engaged with the church, because it does make a difference.
Thank you. Let me pray for us, and we'll wrap up for today. Heavenly Father, I thank you, Lord, always for the ability that you give us, the call that you laid on our lives. God, I ask for your wisdom every single day and the courage to stay faithful to your church, to plow through, to be strong, and to never give up. God, give us the wisdom, give us the sight, and give us the vision forward. In Jesus' most beautiful and precious name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Andre, for all your time.
Thank
God
you.
bless. Take care of each other.